Hello, and welcome to A Gap in Justice, your podcast for anything crime related. How are you guys doing today? My name is Sean. I'm here with my beautiful sister, Lindsay. How you doing today, Lindsay?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's Sunday. We're ready to do our second podcast. We felt that our first one was a little bit stiff because we were both a little bit nervous. So I feel like this one's gonna have a lot more of our personalities, which are a little bit more goofy. so
I wasn't nervous. Were you nervous?
Oh, I was absolutely shaking. But today we have a story that is a bit crazy. My sister has told me a little bit about it. We didn't really dive into your background last time. I have a background of pretty much binge watching, First 48 and Law and Order a little bit. And you have your degree in criminal justice. So
Yeah, I mean, mine's so much more extensive than yours.
yeah.
Yeah, so I have a degree in criminal justice. I also was a prison social worker for a while. And so I've seen the Wisconsin criminal justice system be very ineffective. But I mean, we could talk about that all day. So yeah, I have quite a history in the criminal justice area.
Yeah, I just wanted to let people know a little bit of your background and mine being a little bit of a novice and hearing it from the normal person's perspective.
Well, that's why I do majority of the talking, right?
Exactly. So, all right. So today's story is on someone named Curtis Flowers. Apparently he has been tried for the same crime 6 times, and that is absolutely insane. So,
Yeah, the story is like Sean makes fun of me because I take notes and then I come in with my little notebook and I have filled so many pages today. Like this story, I mean I know I said it last time, like the story was frustrating. Like, are you ready to be frustrated? Because this is the ultimate gap in justice story because he has literally been tried for the same crime again and again and again. And I'm gonna talk about like each trial, at least a little piece of it, and be prepared to get frustrated.
yeah, I mean, I was under the understanding that you weren't able to be tried for the same crime more than once.
Well, you can if it's overturned or there's a hung jury or like the Mississippi Supreme Court makes you, or then ultimately the US Supreme Court makes you also.
Oh wow. So this definitely is going to be a frustrating situation I feel for most people. So, all right. Let's get right into the first part of the story, Linz.
All right, so this is the background. So July 16th, 1996, a retired employee named Sam Jones. He had actually worked at the place of the crime is called Tardy Furniture. And so Sam comes, he worked actually at Tardy Furniture for 50 years, and the owner asked him to come and train some new delivery drivers. So he arrives that day, he finds 4 bodies inside. It's the owner and the 3 employees. They were all shot execution style. Who ended up coming to the scene first was Police Chief Johnny Hargrove. So he was the first one that was there. And, you know, the scene was kind of funny because they actually realized, like, it didn't look like they were dead until you got closer and realized, like, they were actually executed. So there were 4 victims. Like I said, it was the owner and the 3 employees. So the owner is Bertha Tardy, who was 59, Carmen Rigby, 45, Robert Golden, 42, and Derek Stewart, who was 16.
Wow. Okay.
So essentially what happened is Curtis became a suspect because he was fired from the store 13 days prior to the murder.
Okay.
So the police kind of honed in quickly on him, and kind of came up with, well, you know, he clearly has a motive because he was fired from the store. At the scene, they recovered 2 bullets, 2 fragments, 1 live round near the bookcase, and they also found 5 .380 caliber shell casings. So there were 4 victims, 5 shell casings. You know, they also found faint footprints found near Derek. There was money missing from the cash register. But the crazy thing about the story is that this was committed in downtown in broad daylight, except nobody seen or heard anything. So there was actually like a laundromat next door. They didn't report anything. And people were just really like freaked out by this whole thing because it literally happened in the middle of the day.
And what city is this based in?
This is in Winona, Mississippi.
Okay.
So I had looked, and there are about 5,000 people who live there.
Oh, so it's a small town. Okay.
It's very small, which I think is going to play a little bit into the story the more we talk about it, because, the other very interesting thing about this whole story is that there's a lot of racial discrimination you'll hear. And Curtis Flowers is African American.
Bring up a picture of Curtis right now.
Yep. Winona is a majority black. So some people find it very odd that there continues to be racial discrimination in this story because Winona is a majority black.
Who is the owner of and one of the victims of the crime?
Bertha? Yeah, Bertha was white.
Okay.
Yeah. 3 of the victims were white and 1 of the victims were black.
Okay.
Yep. So they took fingerprints. They tried to take fingerprints around the cash register. They tried to look into DNA. Neither came back. They had shoe prints and bullet casings, but they didn't have any shoes or a gun. And there was no apparent motive, And honestly, like, the police chief, Hargrove, ended up giving a press conference later that day, and people were freaked out. The community was terrified. They thought there was, like, a serial killer there. And I read a bunch of articles that talked about police officers that were there really noted that the police chief was like stressed and that he knew he needed to solve this right away because this very small community was freaking out. They were terrified. Yeah. So some of the stuff that started to come into light about Curtis. So like I said, they kind of honed in on him because he had been fired from the store. So the footprints that they found ended up being a size 10.5. That's the same size that Curtis wears.
Okay.
They were actually Fila shoes. Do you remember Fila shoes?
Yeah, I had a few pair of Filas for sure.
I mean, we're going back. It's 1996, so okay. He was wearing some Filas, and so people say they seen Curtis near Tardy Furniture wearing Filas that day. I don't think Filas were ever found, or at least not that I know of. And Curtis actually claims that he was wearing Nikes. I don't know. I mean, if you ask me what I'm wearing, I don't know how many days later they talked to him. It wasn't that long after. But if you're going to ask me what shoes I wore last Monday, I have zero idea.
Yeah, I go through my cycle of shoes, and I have absolutely no idea whatever ones I find really are the ones I put on. So
exactly. So I don't know. I mean, there's so much about there's so much wrong with eyewitness testimony. I mean, so much research has been done about how unreliable that is. Like when you look at Innocence Projects and stuff, and they look for cases that have eyewitness testimony because they know they could probably get the person out of prison just based on that. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence in this case, and I think this is a huge part of the problem in this case is that there's no fingerprints that tie him to this. There's no video that ties him to this. There's no DNA that ties him to this. The other thing too is that apparently they did find gunpowder residue on him. And he said that was from handling fireworks the day before. So this is how I feel about the case. I'm not going to comment whether I think he's guilty or not. I think the point of this whole case is looking at whether you think he's guilty or not, he is still entitled to a fair trial. And I hope by the end of this podcast, people will see that that's ultimately what he didn't get. And that's what the criminal justice system is supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess during his time while he's in prison. So the crazy thing about this whole story is that even though he's been tried and either convicted or reversed or hung jury or things like that, he's remained on Mississippi's death row for 22 years. So he's never gotten out.
Wow.
The entire time he's just had to remain on death row, which we're going to talk about a timeline of of the trials. And like, could you just imagine sitting there for 3 years waiting for your next trial to come? Like, it's horrible. And I know from the Wisconsin criminal justice system, like, things move very slow, and people are fine just leaving you in prison. Like, it doesn't matter.
Oh yeah, especially if, I mean, 3 years is a long time if you are found, I mean, not guilty. That's 3 years of your life that, I mean, you
can
can't.
never get back.
Yeah, exactly. You can't get that. Like, even I think about people who, like, they try to give, like, I mean, a financial, like, payment to try to make it better for, like, things like that, and that's not going to make it better. Like, money isn't going to make 3 years of your life come back. So
Sure. I mean, yeah, I get that. There's some states that don't have that at all, though, either. Like, you could spend 20 years in prison and you'll get zero compensation. But that could maybe be another episode. We can talk
yeah,
about
that's
different
crazy.
states.
Okay.
But yeah, so ultimately, I think another key piece that they talked about is, so like, almost $300 was stolen, and then they ended up finding about $260 at his girlfriend's house. Okay. So they're trying to kind of fit this and connect this. I feel like they really try to shove pieces in place, like, but some stuff does seem weird. Like, you have gunpowder residue, and then magically you're just handling fireworks the day before. So, I mean, again, it's circumstantial evidence, and I am not, for one, a fan of just circumstantial evidence. I think it's ridiculous to convict anybody on just that, you know. Especially, this is a death sentence case.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to talk about, like, the death penalty. I don't want to get into that either. However, my opinion is, unless is it really appropriate to be putting somebody to death? Should we be putting someone to death under circumstantial evidence?
Yeah, that brings it back to, I mean, the death penalty in general. So
Yeah.
maybe that'll be another episode in general. There's a lot to talk about on that. So
Well, the state of Mississippi says yes. Apparently you can. So Curtis has always maintained his innocence. He actually said that he didn't even realize that he was fired from Tarney Furniture. I guess he just stopped going. So, I mean, ultimately, if you stop going to your job, you're going to get fired. Yeah. However, so he didn't realize. So they tried to say, like, his motive for killing all of them is because he got fired and he was angry. And so his rebuttal, he comes back and says, I didn't even know I was fired. I just didn't go. I didn't want to do it anymore.
That's a strange loophole. That's a strange thing. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know I was fired. It's bold.
You know what's odd though is, like, I was always taught, don't just quit your job unless you have a backup plan. You have another job or you have another source of income.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
That's how I grew up. Honestly, there are a lot of people who will legitimately just quit a job, and you're like, how are you going to make money? And they're like, I'll figure it out. So I don't necessarily find that odd, because I've talked to people like that before. They're like, whatever. Okay, so this crime happened July 1996. He went on trial for aggravated murder and robbery in 1997. So at that time, so this is going to be the key player we're going to talk about throughout this, is the prosecutor, Doug Evans. So Doug Evans is the DA in Winona, and he decided to try Curtis for just the store owner.
Okay.
So the reason he did just the store owner is because death that occurs as a result of a robbery would then make him eligible for the death penalty. So that's why he just did the store owner. So Bertha Tardy, he decided to just go after her. What ended up happening is he was convicted by an all-white jury and sentenced to death. So that's what happened in 1997. He was sentenced to death. This ends up being overturned. Okay, so it goes to Mississippi Supreme Court, and they said that the evidence went way beyond what was necessary to prove that it was just murder of the store owner. So basically, the prosecutor was not asking questions that were in good faith and without bias in fact. And so it was sufficient to overturn it because he kept referencing the other murders also. So although they only tried him for the one, he kept referencing the other murders, and that just was apparently beyond what was needed at the time. So he ended up getting this overturned. Basically, what Mississippi Supreme Court said is what may be a harmless error in a case with less at stakes becomes a reversible error when the penalty is death. So basically, because the death penalty was on the table, that, it might have been a harmless error. However, you're trying to kill this guy.
Yeah.
So you need to be appropriate. They also said the 6th and 14th Amendment was repeatedly violated because he did keep mentioning the other killings. Okay. That's 1997. We move forward then to 1999. They decide to retry him again. So this is ultimately what happens. I don't know if you know what happens. So, if you get convicted and then the Supreme Court overturns it, you can choose to either try again or you can choose to acquit them. So, at any point during any of these 6, he had the opportunity to say, I don't have enough evidence. I'm not going to try you again.
Yeah.
He has made the conscious effort or conscious decision again and again and again and again to try this guy. So that's, I think, what I find very frustrating.
Yeah.
It almost seems like it's like a vendetta. And if it's not, it seems that way,
And is he still the DA after 22 years?
He is.
Wow, that's...
So I have that as one of my notes along the way, but let me go find it real quick. So actually this year, he ran unopposed to win the DA race for the Mississippi's 5th district. So he ran unopposed. I'm pretty sure every year or every 4 years, I think he runs unopposed.
So they just, he pretty much has the job every year.
I think we need somebody to run against him.
Yeah, geez Louise. That's crazy.
So 1997, fast forward to 1999, he decides to retry him. We're now at our second trial. So the judge grants a change of venue. So Winona's super small. They're like, hey, we need to, have maybe a different county. Maybe it won't be as biased and people won't know. In this trial, they decide to just try to convict him for Derek, the 16-year-old. Yep. I don't,
Wow.
I read this to him, why are you just trying it for one of the murders? But, they try to go for the store owner, and then now, I feel like they want to try to gain some sympathy by then going after
the 16-year-old. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's, in my mind, that's crazy. They're all murdered the exact same way, at the exact same place.
Could you imagine being the family members of the other people? What do you mean you're not going to try him for my family member?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the fact that they're not old. These people are... The other two were 40.
I don't care if they're old or not. They still are entitled to have justice.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying this isn't one of those things where this is probably a father of the fathers of people, and
sure,
they're not getting any closure immediately. They're just sitting and not having their name mentioned in a case.
It was very odd that he didn't. Yeah, so they just did the store owner Bertha. Then now they're just doing Derek. And so on this jury, it was 11 white jurors, 1 black juror. Again, he was found guilty, sentenced to death. So this was also overturned on prosecutorial misconduct, and that he improperly tried because he, again, was talking about all 4 murders. So although he was only there talking, basically the charge was just for Derek's murder, but he again was talking about all 4 murders, which, how could you not? How could you not, while you're doing, in court, how could you not talk about all of them?
Okay, so my question, with your background, and what is their reasoning for not trying all 4 of them?
I think in the beginning... So in the first one, they only wanted to try for the store owner because they wanted to make him eligible for the death penalty.
Okay.
So, it was a death as a result of a robbery. So I think they're trying to sneak that in.
Okay.
Honestly, I think my gut instinct says there was not enough evidence for all 4.
Okay.
So they try to pick the ones that they think they could get the most.
Yeah, so they're going off the motive for the store owner, and
Yeah.
they're going off the sympathy for the 16-year-old.
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
this is a kid. So, of course,
Yeah.
they're going to, people are going to feel sympathetic towards that. You're going to show pictures. You're going to talk about how he didn't, all the things he's going to miss and missed out on.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense now that you explained it like that, because
Yeah.
I wouldn't think of it as just being normal, like not having any background in it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have thought that, oh, you can get him for motive on only the store owner. No one else will have a motive because he's not really connected to them.
Sure.
And the 16-year-old obviously is an emotional tie. So, okay.
Right.
Keep going, Linz.
So Doug Evans also argued facts that were not in evidence, and he also misstated facts. So that was enough for the conviction to again be overturned. So I just, at this point, like I said, I personally don't want to talk about whether he's guilty or not, but I feel horrible for him. Could you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, I would just want it to be done with. Does that make sense? Like, I don't care if you...
He has spent 2 decades in prison for something he potentially didn't do. And
Yep.
if he did do it, the state's really struggling to prove it.
Yeah.
And I almost get the sense in this case that the state knows that they're struggling to prove it,
Yeah.
but they just won't stop. I listen to a lot of podcasts, I read a lot of things, and, there's actually been DAs in the past who the case will, prove it's somebody else, and they still can't own up to it, and it almost feels like that in this case where, this Doug Evans just keeps going and going and going, and, no matter what, he's just gonna say he's guilty regardless, and
Yeah.
it just is can you just, maybe something in his personality just will not make him apologize or admit that he's wrong. I mean, we know people like that, right?
Yeah.
So,
oh, for sure.
and I just, can they do some background psychological tests for DAs? Because, I mean, when you think about the job, they have the power to put people away. And then once you're in the criminal justice system, it's so hard to get out.
Well, I've heard stories of DAs abusing their power and doing stuff spitefully because they don't like something. So and if this guy he's been there for 22 years,
Yeah.
running unopposed, I mean, he might have a vendetta against this man that he's
Sure.
trying to prove that
Yeah.
is guilty, and they can't, or
Right.
it's getting, that's intense.
Well, we're only on trial number 2.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So it's about to get worse.
Yeah, that's nuts.
All right, so fast forward to 2004. So we're now on the 3rd trial. He decided to try him again. This is now a 5-year time period in between. So now you're waiting for a trial for 5 years.
Okay, on a side note, how old is he in 1996? Do you know
Curtis,
do you know the ages?
Gosh. You know what? I know he's 49 now.
Okay.
So
So he was like 27-ish.
Yep, in his 20s.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Actually, if we go to the next slide, we'll look at, and for our podcast fans, we also do a YouTube channel. And so when you hear us talk about on the screen or go to the next slide,
Yeah,
that's
we just-
specifically for YouTube.
Yeah, we just have a few. Yeah, it's just it's showing a lineup of people that of 6 people, and he is very much different looking than everyone else.
Yes. And you can tell, too, when you look at this picture compared to the last picture, that how young he does look.
Yeah, he does. Yes, he
he's
looks
in his
very young.
20s.
Yep.
Yes. I know he's 49 now. So, yeah, he would have been in his 20s, late 20s when this crime was committed. So, yeah, I mean, I know on my end, whenever I listen to a podcast, I'm very interested. I like to look up the case anyways. So, I think if you guys go to our YouTube channel, too, we do a slide of different things. And so, it's a good way, too, to be able to
See a little
see
bit of
what's
visuals.
going on.
Yeah.
So as you can see, yeah, I mean, I feel like, one, why is his face so close to the camera?
Yeah.
Everybody else's faces are back, and
Yeah.
his is I almost feel like this says, "Pick me, I did it."
Yeah, those are the other pictures. Look, I mean, some of the people are just, I mean, not even close to the frame.
No.
So yeah, it's
So I have problems with this in general. And, yeah. Okay, so we are now on trial number 3, 2004. Again, Doug Evans has a choice to prosecute or not. And he did again. There are 11 white jurors and 1 black juror. Again, he's found guilty. But this time, he was found guilty for all 4 of the murders and again sentenced to death. So finally, I think Doug Evans was like, okay, twice now in a row, they've told me I've done too much and I've talked about the other murders. So now I'm going to talk about all the murders.
Yep.
And okay, I agree then. I think that cool. You finally did what you needed to. You gave justice to the families. And could you really do something wrong if you're doing the right thing? Well, this conviction was reversed again by the Mississippi Supreme Court. So basically what they said is that Doug Evans racially discriminated against black jurors, potential black jurors, during jury selection. So pay attention to this because this is what we're going to hear throughout the rest of the case. This case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and there was a ruling just this last June. So you're going to hear a lot more about potential black jurors.
Wow.
Yeah. So 2004. So what are we looking at now? 15 years ago?
Yep.
The conviction was again reversed. So if you're keeping track, his conviction has been overturned 3 times. He's been tried 3 times. If you were the DA at this point, what would be your thoughts? Because now we're back to you have a choice to try again, or you have a choice to essentially let it go.
I mean, so me as just thinking as, a normal person, I would say...
Normal.
Yeah, like a normie, like I would say, like if I was on the jury, I would say they're being convicted, but they're not fair trials. You've already tried to try it for the store owner. You tried to try it for a 16-year-old to get sympathy. Mm-hmm. You tried to try it for all 4 of them, all of them being overturned. In my mind, there's not circumstantial evidence, nor is he being tried correctly to get a fair trial. So it's never, I don't know what I would do, honestly. That's why I'm not a DA, I guess. So
I think the crazy thing about it, though, is that, although it keeps getting overturned, juries are convicting him every time.
Yeah, it's very... But then again, if the Supreme Court is saying that it's not a fair jury.
Yeah, well, they said that now, but I think at the time, if you look at the DA's point of view, I think he gets like, well, they were convicted, so I'm right. And, I think that's almost why he continues to push it when, why not go back and collect evidence? Why not go back and see if you can find other suspects? Like, I almost think that in a lot of cases, the cops feel pressured to close a case. They hone in on one suspect and they just go with that suspect, and they don't actually ever look at other suspects. There's been a lot of cases that have been overturned just on the fact that they can prove that the police didn't even look for anybody else.
Yeah.
All right, we're now moving on to 2007. So 3 years later, he's being tried for the 4th time. At this point, don't you think could you imagine the amount of times he has to go to court and prep? And, I'm just like, he's probably in his cell like, again. You know.
He's being tried for the same crime. It's not like it's like different crimes. It's literally the same crime. He's hearing the same thing in court every time. Like,
yes. So, all right, this jury had 8 white, 5 black. Okay, so finally...
It's getting more diverse, okay.
That's part of the jury. It's a jury of your peers. And so I think this is a huge part of it, is that his first trial, 0 black jurors. His second and third trial had 1.
Yeah.
So, we're getting a little bit closer. I still think it's pretty unfair, but we're getting a little bit closer to a jury of his peers. It ends up being a hung juror. It's declared a mistrial, because ultimately the jurors are deadlocked. And what happened is, this is the trial that they talked about how there were a lot of racial lines that were in it. So the white jurors wanted to convict him and the black jurors voted to acquit, and they just would not agree. So, usually what the judge will do is tell them to continue to deliberate, continue to think about it, because ultimately, it takes time and money to try people. And so a judge does not want to declare a mistrial, and ultimately he did, because it just was not going to...
It was not budging.
Nope,
yeah.
It was not going to happen. So in 2007, fourth trial, it was declared a mistrial as the jurors were deadlocked. Okay. A year later. So, I mean, hey, they're moving it up. They're trying him a little bit faster. Again, they had the opportunity to not try him at all. He's on his fifth trial now. There are 9 white jurors, 3 black jurors. What do you think happened?
I mean, I would say that he was probably found guilty.
Hung jury.
Oh, hung jury again. Okay.
Again.
So was it a split again, just like last time?
So what ended up happening was 11 jury members were in favor of guilt. There was 1 black juror who voted to acquit. And so he actually said he was in the alley during the time of the murder and he didn't see anything. So the judge decides to have him arrested for lying.
Oh.
That's why I was laughing, because I just was thinking about knowing what was coming, that, you know, one juror decides to acquit him and says,
And he gets arrested.
And he gets arrested.
Okay, so, all right. So the jury's throwing you a curveball and saying, if you don't actually say that he's guilty, you're getting arrested. So that's nice.
The judge ended up saying, like, you did not tell us that you had prior knowledge of this case. Well, a grand jury indicted him for perjury, which had to be dropped because they ended up realizing that during jury selection, they didn't ask if any of the jurors had personal knowledge of the crime or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's not his fault. If he's not asked, then why would I?
Of course. But, you know, I think the judge jumped to a conclusion because in jury selection, you probably should ask if they have personal knowledge of the case.
And I mean, if this is in a city with 5,000 people, that's not a big city. Like,
right.
That's...
Yeah, because they only changed venue 1 time. So
yeah.
He has been tried in the same county 5 times. Yeah. So it was only 1 time.
It was just the second.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think it didn't matter either. You know, I mean, you're not really going to find a county that doesn't know about this case. I mean, this case has now made national news. Like, there's just no way people aren't going to have some type of opinion of this.
I'll go to the next slide for you.
Yep,
so who are these people now?
So this is actually Curtis when he was younger.
Okay.
As you can tell, he looks like he's in his 20s again.
Yep.
And this is the famous Doug Evans.
Oh, okay.
So
nice. I get to see the face. Cool.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, so that's him. So yeah, we are on 2008, trial number 5, hung jury. One of the jurors was arrested.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a thing, apparently. I don't want to be on any juries.
No, that's terrifying. That's actually terrifying. Like, to think that you
could get arrested.
Yeah, you can get arrested. Like,
well, they tried to say he lied. He didn't lie. He was probably like, what?
He was like, I didn't do anything wrong. Like,
I find it a little bit funny, though, that, like, okay, so this was tried in 2008. The crime happened in 1996, so 12 years later, and he's like, I'm acquitting him. I didn't see anything at the time of the murder. What? 12 years later? What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's random. I find it odd.
Yeah.
All right. 2010. We're looking at, what, 9 years ago now. He's on his 6th trial.
Yeah.
11 white jurors, 1 black juror.
Okay.
He is found guilty of all 4 victims and sentenced to death. You know, I tried to look to see if I could find, like, what was talked about during the trials or what was really laid out in these trials because, you know, it seems like these convictions come pretty easy.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know the process of how they got there, and I really didn't find a whole lot of information. So, you know, you could really only kind of find information about ultimately what happened. And so this one was, again, overturned. Oh, I lied. I take it back.
No.
When appealed, the Mississippi Supreme Court upheld it. So they said, nope, no wrongdoings. The conviction stands. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
This was then sent to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The big boys.
Yep.
The big dogs.
So 2 years later, so 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court told the state, hey, you know what? Why don't you take another look at this? Okay? So the state took it and said, nah, we don't see anything wrong with it. So the Supreme Court told them, hey, you know what? You might want to take a look to see if there was discrimination against black potential jurors being excluded. I find this so odd. Like, U.S. Supreme Court says, hey, take a look at this. And the state says, nah. And then it kind of seems to be the end of that, you know?
Yeah.
The U.S. Supreme Court is the boss of other courts.
Correct,
So it's
yeah.
essentially like you telling your boss no, but okay. So, the state says no, there was no discrimination. There was nothing against any, black jurors. So this is the breakdown that I found. 61 of the 72 jurors were white. Okay, so all 6 trials, 72 jurors, 61 of them were white. 61 of them voted for guilt. So every white juror voted for guilt.
Yep.
In denying him a fair trial, you tried to erode the criminal justice system's credibility. Okay, you made it a joke, essentially.
Yeah.
All right, bringing us to 2019, June 21st, 2019. So if you think back, in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court told the state to look at it. Okay, so then now 5 years later down the road, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to look at the case themselves. So even though the state said, no, we're not going to look at it, there's no discrimination, things like that.
The boss said, yeah, we're stepping in. We're going
Yep.
to look at it a little bit.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, that's crazy, yeah.
So, he wins his appeal at the U.S. Supreme Court. So on June 21st, 2019, this is about 2 months ago, he wins his appeal. It was a 7-2 majority. And Justice Kavanaugh was the one who actually wrote the brief. But he talked about striking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about striking. So the DA and the defense has the ability to strike jurors. So what that means is during jury selection, they have the ability to say, I strike that juror. And you can do it for a variety of reasons. You just can't do it because of race, gender, discrimination type purposes.
Yes, okay.
You can say, like, I strike that juror because that's Curtis Flowers' cousin, or that lady's married to Curtis Flowers. You can strike for a variety of reasons. You don't really need to explain why you strike a juror unless it goes up to somebody higher. So, like, Doug Evans was under the limelight of, like, well, why'd you strike this juror? And then had to explain why he struck that juror. So you don't have to do it at the time unless the judge requests things like that. So basically, Kavanaugh wrote that the state struck 41 of 42 black potential jurors, and that misconduct was found numerous times, and that if it wasn't reversed on misconduct, it was a hung jury, which I think says a lot. Every single one of his trials were either reversed or a hung jury. His last trial, there were 6 potential black jurors. Doug Evans struck 5 of them. Okay, so remember the last jury, there was 11 white, 1 black.
1 African American.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there were 6 potential. They struck 5 of them for them to just be 1. One of the things that the Supreme Court discovered, too, is that the black jurors were asked about 3 times the amount of questions during jury selection as to the white jurors. So, the reason that you would ask more questions would be potentially be trying to strike them, to not have them be a part of the case.
Yeah.
That sounds like a gap in justice. Why are you asking so many questions, and how do you explain that?
Yeah, shouldn't you be asking the same questions to everyone?
Absolutely.
That doesn't make sense to me. It's like getting a pop quiz at school, and then one person be like, oh, well, you can get a few more wrong because we gave you more questions on it. So
Right. Like, a fair trial is just that, a fair trial. There's not really anything that you need to make past that. And ultimately, the Supreme Court really kind of got on Doug Evans and realized, like, you're wrong. This is wrong. What you've done is wrong.
I'm going to switch to the next slide here.
This is just one of the court cases. Who knows? He's been to court how many times now? So this is one of the, Those glasses are kind of round, maybe early 2000s.
Yeah, those are some definitely early 2000s glasses for sure.
Yeah, so this is just one of the many times that Curtis went to court. You know, I can only imagine how frustrating that was. I mean, if you're in prison and you're on your way to the court date, you get sent from prison to the local jail. You sit probably in the local jail for as long as they want you to then just go to this trial every day. So it's really a frustrating experience.
And you're hearing the same trial 6 times over the course of your 22 years of being tried.
Well, let's see.
Like,
The first trial was in 1997, and the last one was in 2010.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's
so about a
crazy.
13-year period.
Yep.
Yeah. And then now he's just had to wait forever. Like, ultimately, he was waiting for the Supreme Court decision, which can take years. Years. But they finally came back with a decision this year, and they said that no, you know, this is not okay. You know, they found that black jurors were struck. And they tried to say it was because they had connections to the family, which sounds plausible. You know, that makes sense.
I mean, it could, yeah.
But then they turned around and found that there were 3 white jurors who had connections to the family as well. So
That wasn't asked that question because you're fishing for things to get a juror out of the,
absolutely.
jury.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's a small town. You can't strike jurors left and right.
Yeah.
You know? This is the thing, though, about striking jurors, is that you only get so many. Okay? So if we break down the trials. So in the first trial, 5 jurors were struck. They had 5 to strike. So he used all 5. Second trial, 5 jurors were struck. He had 5. The next one, 15 were struck. And a black juror, so there were 3 black jurors in the third? Let me look back. Nope, I lied. 1 black juror. 15 of them were struck. Only 1 got on because Doug Evans ran out of strikes. So that's why there was 1 black juror in the third trial.
Oh, wow.
In the fourth trial, he used all of his strikes and he ended up running out. So the fourth trial was the one that actually had quite a few black jurors. That was 5 black jurors. So there was only 5 black jurors on that jury because he ran out of strikes. What?
And that was a hung jury.
Don't tell me
So-
that's not saying something. Yep, and that one was a hung jury.
You know what makes me like very questionable about this is you told us the fact that there was, what was it, 62 out of 73 jurors were white?
61, yep, out of
Yes,
72.
61 out of 72. In one trial, there was 5 of them. Because of the strike system. You couldn't strike them, so there was 5 on one trial. So
Yep.
you're telling me in 5 other trials, there is 6 African-American jurors. That is insane. It's supposed to be a jury of your peers.
Yeah.
You're not, and you're getting asked more questions. This, to me, this seems like racial profiling. This seems very much strongly decided by someone who is clearly being racist.
Well, and the U.S. Supreme Court agreed. I mean, you know, the thing that I find interesting is if Winona is a majority black, why are you acting like you can't find a jury of his peers? They come to jury selection, and then you're intentionally getting rid of them. In the third trial, he struck 15. Only 1 made it on. So there were 16 potential black jurors there. 15 of them were not a part of the jury.
And he only had
What?
15 strikes.
Yes!
Which means that no white jurors were struck.
No!
That's great. Yeah. That's, oh man.
There were no white jurors struck the entire trial.
Yeah.
Any of them.
That's insane.
What?
That's,
The 5th trial, he struck all of the black jurors again. And then in the 6th trial, he was able to strike 5 of the 6. So 1 black juror actually made it on. So, you know, again, the last case was 11 white, 1 black.
it's a real gap in justice. Here's a picture of Curtis being, detained, obviously, or being...
He's probably, on
Yeah.
his, he's in what looks like a prison uniform. So he's potentially probably, he's, like I said, he's probably being taken from prison back to jail, because then he'll sit in jail and await his trial. So I can only imagine the amount of times he's done that. And, could you imagine trying to, like, build some type of routine into your day and then having that disrupted all the time because you're being transported back and forth for court and things like that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, the funny thing about this picture is I feel like the two guards in the back are like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah, he's like, it might have been the same guards that takes him every time. Obviously, the DA's been there for 22 years. Maybe these guards have been the same guys for him,
Can somebody just decide what's going on? I think with this case, we get to the point now of like, what now? So, obviously, the U.S. Supreme Court said, they won his appeal. And so what we look at now is, what do we do? Where do we go? Like we've talked about, Doug Evans, who was just elected for another 4-year term this year, has the decision. So, how long he remains in prison is really up to Doug Evans. So Doug Evans has been the prosecutor every time. If he decides to try him again for a 7th time, he would be the prosecutor again. The thing that I struggle with is the U.S. Supreme Court said there's clearly racial discrimination here. Why is Doug Evans the one who could potentially try him again? Does that even make sense?
It does. After 22 years of there not being a decision be able to be made, I feel like someone needs to step in and have another DA to at least have him please have a fair trial. Clearly there's no circumstantial evidence to the fact that he's either getting, it's a hung jury or he's not getting a fair trial. Mm-hmm. So, this really is a gap in justice. It's exactly why we wanted to start the podcast, so people get the knowledge of these, big flaws in our justice system.
Right.
Where, the same DA has been on the same case for 22 years. Mm-hmm. There is not any change in, anything. Like, right. He really needs some fresh aspects or fresh eyes on, I think, would be the best thing, my opinion. So.
Yeah, so so the Mississippi court has to vacate his conviction. He'll ultimately be released then to jail, where he waits to see if Evans will decide whether or not to try him for a 7th time. So the U.S. Supreme Court reversed the decision, but now ultimately Evans can just hold him for an undisclosed amount of time until he decides whether he's going to try him or not. What? Again, working in a prison, the criminal justice system moves very slow. Curtis could potentially sit in jail for a long time, waiting to see if he's even... So, how is the U.S. Supreme Court saying that they're vacating his sentence, but then he has to sit there? I think a good point to realize is, it's not the Supreme Court's responsibility to judge whether he's guilty or not. They're just demanding that Mississippi give him a fair trial.
Yeah, I think that's fair for anyone.
Yeah.
That's the most simple thing to do. You need to have a fair trial, or you're sentencing a guy to death. This isn't like he's gonna sit in prison. This is
a big
death.
deal.
So yeah, someone's life is definitely a big deal.
So there was actually a great podcast called In the Dark, and it was pretty extensive. So they went into this case pretty extensively. And so back in June, when, the U.S. Supreme Court decision came out, they covered the court case and things like that. Mm. And so one of the things that happened is right after the case was vacated, they tracked down Doug Evans. Mm. And they asked him hey, what do you think about the Supreme Court's verdict? And he goes, there's no question in guilt. There's never been any question of guilt. Courts are like you and me. Everyone's got opinions. And he also said he did not read the opinion of the court justices.
Oh.
What?
Oh, as a DA, he's not going to read the opinion of the... Oh. Mm.
He's meh, whatever.
He's like, my bosses. It doesn't matter. I kind of do my own thing, you know.
Yeah, he's the boss, so it doesn't matter. He also commented that he's unsure whether he's gonna try Curtis Flowers or not again. You know, I think that if history shows us anything, I think it's pretty clear that he's gonna try him again. I don't have a doubt in my mind that he won't. Why wouldn't he? You know?
I mean, he could spend his whole life trying him.
You really think he's just going to turn around after 22 years and say, okay, you know what? Every case has either been overturned or hung jury, and now the highest court in the land has said, you know, that Curtis Flowers won his appeal. But you know what? I'm just going to let you go. I don't see that happening.
No way. Not a chance.
This picture, so this is actually Archie Flowers. This is Curtis Flowers' dad. So he's one of the biggest supporters for him. And this picture is actually him on the phone talking to family after they found out that the appeal was won. So I like it. I think it's like a good ending.
It is, yeah.
You know, he just looks so happy. And, you know, I think one of the things I know about being a prison social worker is that if you do a lot of time, you're going to lose people in your life. You know, it's hard to support somebody in prison. It's hard to be there for someone who needs stuff from you ultimately, you know, and his dad has been a major supporter for him and has stood by him and has maintained his innocence. So, you know, I think that this picture is cool.
Yeah, this is an incredible picture, honestly. You can physically see the joy in his face.
He's so happy.
So it's 22 years. I would be happy too for my son that you've seen have to go through all of these struggles and not getting fair trials. And it epitomizes what, you would feel if your son got a fair trial for once. So
I like how he's happy even despite the clear racial discrimination. Like, he's positive regardless, because I feel like a little bit of me is pessimistic and would come in and be like, yeah, we won our appeal, but da 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 da. And, you know, honestly, I think he's happy just to be happy. Like, you know, that, this is big. I think this is bigger than what people think. Like, the U.S. Supreme Court said, not okay. And it was 7-2 majority, which is huge. You know, it's not even like it was divided that big.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. And, you know, even judges who essentially probably wouldn't have been in the majority were. So, you know, the interesting thing about that is I was trying to find the article that I found that talked about the justices. But yeah, there were some justices that normally would never have talked about or even been, you know, it would have been unlike them to do anything like that. Basically, the court case that they referenced was Kentucky versus Batten, which basically said that, you know, you cannot remove potential black jurors based on their race. And the Supreme Court said it's pretty much obviously been, that's exactly what happened in this case. You know, there's really no way that you can say that that's not what happened.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, hopefully we get, Curtis and his family get some form of fair trial. Hopefully the best to him, honestly. Whether he did it or not, I have no idea. It's not the point. It's the fact that everyone is very much, they're deserving of a fair trial. No matter, and they're deserving of not being racially profiled. They're deserving of not being, just really toyed around by the, by the actual system. Like, he's being toyed around right now, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, it seems like he's pretty positive. He's maintained positivity throughout. He's always maintained that he's been innocent. And I think that, you know, he is really owed a fair trial. But, I don't even know if he should be tried again, because shouldn't he have been convicted already? You know? And he's been convicted, but it's been overturned. So, I don't know. I'm like on the end of like, wow, why don't you just leave him alone?
It's been, he's, first of all, you don't have evidence enough to, or you haven't got enough of decision to give him a death penalty. He spent 22 years in prison. I feel like that's majority enough. Correct? Like if you're really not getting an answer for it, 22 years I think is a fair amount. Maybe 25 years, okay, 3 more years, then he's out, you know?
I am very interested to see where this case is going to go because honestly, they could do that. They could turn around and say, all right, plead guilty, say you did it, and we'll let you have time served. The problem with that is that then he's a felon forever.
Yep.
The other problem with that, and I don't know if Mississippi has legal compensation, I would have to look at it, but if they do, if he pleads guilty, he would not be entitled to that at all. So he wouldn't get paid for being wrongly in prison because he's ultimately saying he did it. So, I'm very interested to see where they go. I feel like DAs still try to get some of these older cases to do that because it's still considered a win then.
Yeah.
And
I mean, of course, you don't have to pay out. You don't. You get guilty on the
but
books,
like,
right?
yeah,
Like,
in the win category and lose category, or like, you know, as a DA, it's still a win. And so I think that again, it just goes into like, you know, maybe put your pride a little bit to the side and do what's in the best interest for your community and do what's in the best interest for Curtis.
yeah.
You
I mean,
know?
I think that's fair to everyone. So, all right. Well, you want to wrap it up?
I'm done.
All right. I feel like this has been an intense and crazy conversation.
I feel sweaty,
but
kind of.
yeah, it's very. I feel a bit better about knowing that. I mean, at least he got some form of justice this time. Hopefully, he doesn't get tried again. Hopefully the Supreme Court keeps on them, and we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah, so, I mean, maybe in the future we'll do like a mini episode of what happens.
Yeah, of course. So, this has been A Gap in Justice. I am Sean. This is my sister Lindsay. We hope you enjoyed. Hopefully, we keep doing this and having fun with it, right?
Yeah, and we only frustrated you a little bit.
Yeah, just a tiny bit. And we had a lot of fun with it, even though it is a very, very frustrating topic. So, have a good week, and we'll see you next time. Take it easy.